It's been almost 50 years since Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s death, and there are still some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. When I think about 12-year-old Tamir Rice and the recent decision of a grand jury to not indict the police officers who killed him, that maladjustment turns to feelings like anger, disbelief, and sadness, not only at the verdict, but how such a horrible thing could happen in the first place. Having seen the tragedy on video only makes this senseless killing even more nonsensical. How can that happen? Why did that happen? That is not supposed to happen. You can blame individual bad police officers, you can blame the law enforcement system, but for anyone willing to look deeper, it's also evident that there is something very pathological in a bigger system, our social system, that pollutes our network of mutuality. I've really struggled with this seemingly unending killings by police because I come from a police family. Two of my uncles were police officers, one recently retired and the other long retired and recently deceased. And decades ago, my late grandfather worked his way up from humble beginnings to become the deputy police chief in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He also served as interim chief and helped establish the Allentown Police Academy. Every year, my extended family pools money to give a $500 award to a recruit in each of the Academy's graduating classes. This award, given in memory of my uncle and grandfather, goes to the most improved recruit, determined by a vote of peers in the class. I've been to a couple of these Police Academy graduations full of bright young faces that really do want to protect and serve. So knowing my own family, coupled with experiencing the idealism of these young police officers, I have no tolerance for those who paint all police as trigger-happy, racist bullies. But yet, I also know that grave injustices are being committed and that things have to change and that individuals need to be held responsible. We're living in a society in which dark-skinned adults and even children are seen as more dangerous and more threatening than others, and whose lives are valued less than others. This wicked combination of unconscious and conscious beliefs is everywhere, in hearts, in minds, in systems and institutions. But it's in law enforcement and police encounters where these biases have become the most insidious and deadly. In high-stakes situations marked with life and death, split-second decisions, and police are getting it wrong. It is in the law enforcement and criminal justice system where the worst ills of our social system play themselves out with deadly force. So how do we even begin to unravel and reverse the sickness that's in our society? What superpower do we need to change millions of hearts and minds from the inside out when many white hearts and minds don't even see the need to change at all? Well, friends, that superpower is love. Dr. King said, "When I speak of love, I'm not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I'm speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality." African-American feminist writer Bell Hooks writes about what she calls Dr. King's ethic of love. She says, "The civil rights movement transformed society in the U.S. because it was fundamentally rooted in a love ethic. No leader has emphasized this ethic more than Martin Luther King Jr. He had the prophetic insight to recognize that a revolution built on any other foundation would fail. Again and again, King testified that he had decided to love because he believed deeply that if we are seeking the highest good, we find it through love, because this is the key that unlocks the door to the meaning of ultimate reality. The civil rights movement had the power to move masses of people to act in the interest of racial justice because it was profoundly rooted in this ethic of love. So what's so special about this ethic of love, and why do we need it? Well, Bell Hooks says that in this society, we really don't have any powerful political discourse on love. The absence of a sustained focus on love comes from our collective failure to acknowledge the needs of the spirit and an overdetermined emphasis on material things. Without love, our efforts to liberate ourselves and our world community from oppression and exploitation are doomed. As long as we refuse to address fully the place of love in struggles for liberation, we won't be able to create a culture of conversion where there's a mass turning away from an ethic of domination. Without an ethic of love shaping the direction of our political vision and our radical aspirations, we are often seduced in one way or the other into continued allegiance to systems of domination, imperialism, sexism, racism, and classism. A love ethic allows us to expand our concern about the politics of domination and our capacity to care about the oppression and exploitation of others. And if that passage was a little bit long and difficult to follow, I'll just sum it up by saying Bell Hooks is saying, if we put love first, we care. Today, 2 generations after Dr. King's ethic of love, a new racial justice movement has arisen. Last spring, Opal Tometi, one of the 3 women founders of Black Lives Matter, said to a room of Unitarian Universalists that the cosmos is urging us to complete Dr. King's work. Black Lives Matter represents a new generation and a new century and has a different way of going about things. But yet, the love ethic is still present in the movement's guiding principles. Black Lives Matter believes in loving engagement, committed to embodying and practicing justice, liberation, and peace in interactions. Black Lives Matter is also committed to the practice of empathy. Another co-founder named Alicia Garza says that just saying Black Lives Matter both literally and figuratively restores people's dignity. She says for us, Black Lives Matter is really a rehumanization project. It's a way for us to love each other again, to love ourselves, and to project that love into the world so that we can transform it. That is a love ethic, if I ever heard one. And yet, Black Lives Matter is not your grandfather's racial justice movement. The leadership and the organization of the movement is decentralized and organic. Having been accused of being a leaderless movement, Black Lives Matter refers to itself as a leader-full movement, saying many Americans of all races are enamored with Dr. Martin Luther King as a symbol of leadership and what real movements look like. But the Black Lives Matter movement recognizes many flaws with this model. They say a focus on heterosexual, non-transgender Black men frequently causes us not to see the significant amount of labor and thought leadership that Black women provide to movements. Moreover, these old modes of leadership favored the old over the young, attempted to silence gay and lesbian leadership, and did not recognize the leadership possibilities of transgender people at all. Black Lives Matter goes on to say a movement with a singular leader or a few visible leaders is vulnerable because those leaders can easily be identified, harassed, and killed, as was the case with Dr. King. By having a leader-full movement, Black Lives Matter addresses many of those concerns. It is composed of many local leaders and many local organizations. They demonstrate through this model that the movement is bigger than any one person. and there is room for the talents, expertise, and work ethic of anyone who is committed to freedom. The Black Lives Matter movement also looks and sounds different from previous generations. Although it considers itself intergenerational, the movement rejects what it calls the respectability politics of the civil rights era, which is the belief that proper dress and speech will guard against harassment by police. The movement rejects this thinking in the face of massive evidence of police mistreatment of Black people of all classes and backgrounds. The movement believes all people should be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of how one looks or speaks. In addition to Dr. King and Black Lives Matter, for the past 7 years, Unitarian Universalists have been putting their ethic of love to work through the Standing on the Side of Love campaign. This campaign was conceived in 2008 after the shooting at Tennessee Valley UU Church in Knoxville, Tennessee. The church was targeted by a shooter because of its welcoming to LGBTQ people and general liberal stance on many issues. The whole Knoxville community responded with an outpouring of love that inspired the leadership at the Unitarian Universalist Association to start this campaign in 2009. And its goal is to harness love's power to challenge exclusion, oppression, and violence based on sexual orientation, gender identity, immigration status, race, religion, or any other identity. And each year, Standing on the Side of Love encourages participation in something called 30 Days of Love, which begins this weekend, Martin Luther King Jr. holiday weekend, and ends, appropriately enough, on Valentine's Day. This year, the focus is to lift up ways UUs and partner organizations are building and organizing by taking bold, courageous action for intersectional racial justice, including supporting efforts of Black Lives Matter. And in addition to Standing on the Side of Love's support of Black Lives Matter, in June, the UUA General Assembly passed an action of immediate witness, which is essentially a resolution to support the Black Lives Matter movement. The resolution urges member congregations to learn about and organize for racial justice. It also urges congregations to collaborate with local and national organizations fighting for racial justice. And on Wednesday, Virginia Unitarian Universalists will be visiting the state capitol to petition the Virginia General Assembly to join us in standing on the side of love and supporting Black Lives Matter through proclamations, declarations, and legislation. Other priority areas to discuss with legislators are healthcare expansion, income equality, and voting rights. In my journeys learning more about Standing on the Side of Love and Black Lives Matter, I became aware of a young adult UU named Kenny Wiley, a lifelong UU. He's a blogger and a religious educator working at a church in the Denver area. The description of Kenny's blog is love-infused words on faith, sports, and social justice from a Black male Unitarian Universalist. And his words are powerful. He has actually written a Unitarian Universalist Black Lives Matter theology. It's pretty impressive, right? And I highly recommend you read it, and I'll post a link to it on the UUFP Facebook page along with some other resources. In his essay, Kenny Wiley refers to our first principle, calling it the one that everyone actually remembers, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And about it, he says, it's beautiful and simple, and too often not quite true. Like the Declaration of Independence and the preamble of the Constitution, the first principle of Unitarian Universalism stands as an unrealized promise. It is a map of the work done centuries and decades ago, and a map of the work yet to do. The first principle, he says, operates as radical hope, which transcends institutions of present-day society, but doesn't transcend the laws of physical or human nature. It looks to the future, but not to heaven. Wiley says to fight for Black lives now is to participate in a radical hope. It is to battle for salvation on this earth. It is to fight for life, for love, for justice. It is to demand more out of the first principle. It is also to demand a more perfect faith. He goes on to say that most of us in this faith are here because we felt welcome at last, right here. Some of us were too agnostic somewhere else. Some of us weren't vindictive enough somewhere else. We were too working class somewhere else. We were too lesbian somewhere else. We were too nerdy somewhere else, too introverted somewhere else, too gay married somewhere else. He says, many of us are here because this faith and the people in it affirmed, you may not be perfect, but your life matters just the same. He says that's what's on the line now, through racism and posthumous victim blaming, through silence and bullets and indifference and vilification. Black people are being told that our lives do not matter, or that they matter only conditionally. Black lives matter if we are educated, if we are respectful, if. And sometimes he says, not even then do our lives matter. Kenny Wiley is saying that UUs are being called to act. We are being called by our ancestors, those who insisted, who demanded that we help end slavery, that we fight for the women's right to vote, that we join the struggle to end Jim Crow, that we listen to and honor the Black Power movement. He says that our ancestors, principles, and fellow humans are calling on us to promote and affirm with both deeds and words that Black lives matter just the same. So, UUFP, what are we to do? Are we ready for revolutionary love driven by an ethic that puts love for all with no exceptions at the forefront of our moral values, at the forefront of our theology? We can start by educating ourselves, which is not too hard to do if you have the internet. Are the terms white privilege, microaggressions, and intersectionality unfamiliar to you? Check out standingontheSideOfLove.org or blacklivesmatter.com and read the UU Action for Immediate Witness in support of Black Lives Matter. Follow these organizations on Facebook. Subscribe to their email lists. Here's another thing you can do. If you go to a Black Lives Matter or related vigil, demonstration, or rally, and do not happen to be Black yourself, commit this phrase to memory. I am an ally here in solidarity with the Black community. I am an ally here in solidarity with the Black community. Saying and internalizing the meaning of this phrase is humbling, and it's insurance against the pitfall for many allies who fail to realize that just because they are participating in a movement, it doesn't mean that it's now all about them. Allies don't get to be self-righteous and self-congratulatory. They show up when invited, with humility, ready to listen, learn, and follow instructions. Revolutionary love is by definition countercultural in a society that holds up self-interest and materialism above beloved community. But yet, love still works. It is a superpower. Dr. King's ethic of love brought about the Civil Rights Act. Black Lives Matter's ethic of love expands upon Dr. King's vision to include the excluded. Unitarian Universalists express their ethic of love through standing on the side of love, harnessing love's power to challenge exclusion, oppression, and violence based on sexual orientation, gender identity, immigration status, race, religion, or any other identity, so that our first principle will finally be more than just radical hope. In the words of Bell Hooks, the moment we choose to love, we begin to move against domination, against oppression. The moment we choose to love, we begin to move towards freedom, to act in ways that liberate ourselves and others. May this be so.